But this I say, he that soweth sparingly shall reap also sparingly, and he which soweth bountifully shall reap also bountifully. Every man according as he purposed in his heart, let him give, not grudgingly of necessity. For God loveth a cheerful giver. And God is, now this is what I like here. Of course, all of it's good, but I like this. God is able to make all grace abound towards you, that you always having all sufficiency in all things may abound to every good work. How about that? All grace abound, so that you have all sufficiency in all things for all good works. What this is saying is God's grace, and we talked about, in God's grace is everything God is, everything that he can give us. He is able, now these folks were doing what he had told them to do. He said, he's able to make grace abound in all things. That leaves nothing out in your life, so that you'll have a sufficiency and have enough so that you can give, so that you can help somebody else with it. So we think of grace sometime, grace just was that unmerited favor that caused God to forgive us. Now, everything that God has for us is through grace. Amen. Because which one of us deserved anything from God because sin was there, see? But he said he would make it abound. I love that. Make it abound towards you, that you always have all sufficiency in all things. Now, sometimes, us as human, it's hard to distinguish what our need is and what our want is. It's hard to distinguish the difference, isn't it? But one thing, when we are expecting God to fulfill our needs, then we are seeking after him to fulfill our need. And everybody has a different need. But he's able in his grace to give us whatever the need is if we trust him for it. Now, I got a Facebook friend that's over in Kenya, I believe. Is it Kenya? No, it's not Kenya. It's Uganda. Mm-hmm. And he said last year, now he runs an orphanage. And he was praising God. Said last year he figured it up and he averaged $2 a month in personal income. But see, God had supplied him through people to run that orphanage and to take care of himself. See? And around here, $2 wouldn't be enough. But see, wherever we're at and whatever the need is, God knows it, and in his grace is our answer. God expects us to do what we know to do, and God blesses what we put our hand to. We've talked about it around here a lot of times. We don't sit down and say, okay, God, you promised me this and you promised me that. God expects us to be moving and doing what he said. Sometimes we have to move from where we are to where God says to ever get the blessing that God is wanting for us. Abraham had to leave his house, folks, and his kinfolks to get what God was wanting. But God is more than enough. But when we can't distinguish between what we need and what we want, then we start blaming God because it don't work for us. And the reason that when we can't distinguish between what we need and what we want, that's the reason we run our credit cards out of the ceiling. Because we start thinking we need stuff that we don't need. And we start buying, because in America especially, America's been so wealthy for so long, we get our eyes on what other folks has got. Why can't I have what the Joneses has got? Well, we don't know what the Joneses went through to get that. But God said he would make his grace abound so that we'd have sufficiency in all things. Pride gets in our way sometimes, and we want things. And we forget that Jesus said, and it's all right to want things. If you don't desire things, but again, it all has to be in the plan of God. But Jesus said to seek first the kingdom of God and all his righteousness, and these things would be added. But we're microwave people. We want these things added before we start. We want them yesterday. But his promise was in his grace. He'd make it abound. I love that. abound. In other words, whatever we needed comes right out of that grace. But he's got a plan. It's hard to get a hold of this. But God has a plan for every aspect of our life. But we have a habit. Now maybe he's talking to myself. I've always had the habit of wanting first to put my hand to it. I've got more trouble trying to work it out. Then when I get in over my head, then I'm calling for God to do something. But we have the tendency. Okay, this is what I need, so I'm going to work it out. But if all our needs is immediately and on our time fulfilled, it's probably because we got ahead of God and worked it out ourselves. And we wind up short of what God would have done. Like who?
Like Sarah.
Like Sarah.
Example.
Abraham, yeah. Yeah. And I told you that story back when I'd been at Newberry 14 and a half years. It's most of my young life then. And had a wife and 2 kids and got laid off on Christmas. And they took, I was supervisor, and they took the crew and everything. They just cut the workforce, almost down to nothing. And on Christmas, I got laid off. I mean, it looked devastating. But they paid me for the full month. I mean, I was like a week before Christmas. They paid me for the full month, give me all my vacation. Right in the hunting season. But see, looking at it with the natural eyes, but this is terrible. But because I didn't know what I was going to do. I'd been there all them years, and didn't. But the first day I took off hunting and went down to the unemployment there in Anniston office and signed up. When I got back to the house, the phone was ringing. I went to work next day making more than I was making at Newberry after 14 and a half years. See? If I'd have worked it out, I'd have been at Newberry. But God worked it out, and I wound up making more than I was making there after 14 and a half years. And got to hunt. I was so tickled about that. But at that time, hunting was a big part of my life. Everything does not happen on our timing. It doesn't. Because God knows exactly how to bring things step by step by step. Look over by at Galatians. I believe it's chapter 5. In Galatians chapter 5 and 6, it tells us that faith works by love. So the 2 most important things in expecting God's grace to be sufficient is to have faith that He's going to do what He said and to operate in love. See? Because faith does not work without love, and without faith, we'll miss what God's trying to do for us. We'll miss it because we're not expecting it. And as I studied this, I was thinking, back when I was a child coming along, most churches was teaching that God really wanted His people to walk around with just barely enough. Just naked and barefooted, just to keep you humble. And when we found out that God wanted to prosper us, it opened up so much that God was always trying to get there. See? But we still got folks today that thinks that God doesn't want you to prosper. But He told the Israelis way back in Deuteronomy that it was He that gave them power to get wealth. So God doesn't care about what you're able to accept. I mean, He doesn't care if you're a multimillionaire as long as you know where it come from and know what to do with it. He blesses His people so that we can be a blessing. He never makes folks rich in the kingdom so that they can be looked at and folks saying, man, Ain't he successful? He blesses his people to bless people. See? And do you understand? Of course, I know you do. Without God's supply of money and materials, the work couldn't go on. So it's not that he's withholding, it's what can we accept and what will we move to get. Yes. Like I said, the fellow over in I just said it, Uganda was thankful for the $2 because, that supplied his need. And I found out something. The more that we just thank God for what we got, the more God increases. Nothing wrong with things, folks. But I saw a fellow the other day to show you that hey, the devil does not want you to have anything. Because if you don't have anything, you can help nobody. But I saw a fellow the other day on Facebook. It hurts me. He was mocking those who believed in believing and receiving. He was one of those that was still hung up on you, supposed to be poor. And then he turned right around and began to talk what bad shape he was in. Wow. And I'm kind of weird thinking anyway. I was thinking, well, either we believe what Jesus said, believe and receive what Jesus said, or we doubt and do without. You're on one of those things, see? If you just say, I ain't going to have it, then faith can't bring it. But his grace is that. See, God's grace. Paul's need was one time, and we talk about this because we've done the whole lessons on Paul's thorn in the flesh. Paul's need at that time was to have his eyes healed. Yes. That was his need. And God said, my grace is sufficient. So in his grace was Paul's healing. That's what he needed. Paul, the Lord made his grace abound, and Paul got his healing. If whatever our need is, grace will abound to take care of that if we believe what God said and start expecting it. See, folks, back, like I said, when they was all preaching that you had to be poor as Job's turkey to be pleasing to God, good people stayed that way because they had no faith that they weren't supposed to be that way. See? They wasn't expecting God to do nothing. And God cannot get to us what we don't expect him to get to us. And whatever as it comes, we just begin to thank him. We just begin to thank him, and God begins to work in our lives. Abounding grace opens the possibilities to us, but faith and love is what makes the possibilities become realities. But see, it's not things that we desire. It's God that we desire. And he adds things because he loves us. And because we have to have things. When he told Israel that, when he said it's he that it gives you power to get wealth, he said, so that his covenant can be established in the earth. He said, I'm going to supply you your need. So, because the earth works on money, folks. You ever notice that? But he said, I'm going to supply you so that you can establish what I said in the earth. Evangelists that has given their life to evangelize in the world, they couldn't go all over the world without supply, folks. God makes the supply happen so that they can go. Now, again, that's we do what we know to do, and it's like I heard a comedian say one time, talking about all the money that we send folks over in Africa, and we do. Nothing happens better, though, than sending the gospel first and letting them understand and know how to operate in the gospel. He said, you always see their need. He said, the first thing we ought to tell them is move out of the desert. See, that's doing the lodging. We going over there, they're in the desert and they're not moving. Move out of the desert. Hey, folks, if you're looking for a job, you don't go out there in the mountains and say, Lord, supply me a job. You go where there's jobs and ask, Lord, to guide and direct you and give you the right one. You ever had a wrong one? Luke's right, and Luke's writing. in the 12th chapter, 15th verse, he tells us to beware, to take heed and beware of covetousness. For a man's life consists not in the abundance of the things which he possesses. See, when we get all tied up in possession, then we forget to thank God for what we have. And you know that there's a scripture that talks about the love of money is the root of all evil. Yeah. And people will leave out the love of and teach money is the root of all evil. Now, money's not evil. But when we get our focus strictly on money and not on God, it becomes evil. The root of all evil, the want of it becomes the root of all evil. Trust in God it's a peacemaker in our soul, folks. Having faith that he's going to take care of it is a peacemaker in our soul. And I've done come too far to ever believe that he won't take care of it, because he's done it over and over and over. And I've been in places where I didn't know how he's going to do it. And I've been in places where I began to wonder, has he forgot? But he hadn't. And he always brought us through those things. Because he has abounding grace, folks. But the things that God gives us either becomes things that we're thankful for as blessings, or the things we embrace as a matter of pride and social standing. And see, and it's always amazing when God begins to bless a Christian. The world will dog you if you got too much. You know that. They'll dog you if they think you. Well, they call themselves Christian. They look like that big house they got, and they drive a new car. Wonderful. Wonderful. And those things too. I believe. I mean, I couldn't do it, and I'm probably a poor example. But I could not be a multimillionaire and see folks lacking. Well, yeah, you would be, but I mean, that's God's plan, is to keep everything flowing. Following first his direction. Do you understand the world would take your last dime and laugh at you for being broke? Yeah. But you follow God's direction, and I guarantee you he sends by folks that actually need. And I always kind of use this. If somebody else has to tell me that somebody's in need, I know they're in need. Now, I want folks to tell me if they are in need. And there's nothing wrong with that. If you need something, and anybody, and any other family can let us know. That's right. But when somebody else comes by and says, do you know so-and-so is in need? They're in need. When they ain't said nothing, they're still dependent upon the Lord. Hey, it doesn't mean you're not dependent upon the Lord if you see where your supply is at. Maybe it's because God's saying, get over there and do that. And like I told you the story here last year, I believe it was. Me and Alice was up in Anniston and passed a McDonald's, and we stopped in to get a cup of coffee, and it was cold, wind was blowing. And there was a man sitting out there with a sign that said, I will work for food. Well, you know how many of them is cons. Yeah. But I told Alice, I said, I just felt like going over and talking to him. And I said, I hadn't got a job. I said, have you ate today? He said, no, sir, not today. And I said, it was cold. He was out there with, and so I said, well, come on in here. I'm gonna buy you breakfast. And we walked to McDonald's. I said, pick out anything you want. He got the cheapest thing on the menu and a cup of coffee. I told her the man is looking for a job. Yeah. See? Because if he wouldn't, he'd have got the most expensive thing. And I told him, I said, get you more than that. He said, no, this will do me. He was looking for a job. And you know what? God set him up with somebody to give him breakfast. I believe somebody came by and he got a job too. Yeah. God's grace is sufficient. But whatever your situation is, folks, understand that God's grace has been extended through Jesus. Through Jesus has been extended to fulfill that for you. Already there for every aspect of your life. Expecting. And again, that's faith doesn't work unless you expect it to work. And it doesn't work unless you have the love for God. You can make $1 million if you're smart enough, to get out there and make it the world's way. But if you leave God out of it, then God's out of it. Whatever happens is you and your choice. But I found that you can trust God. I found, as Paul, that he told Paul, his grace is sufficient if we just depend upon him. And I thank God tonight that we serve a God that loves us and that's waiting to give us the good things. Jesus said it was his good pleasure to give us the kingdom. It's God's good pleasure. And we don't need to be feeling like orphans because we're children of the King. And no orphans in the kingdom. They're all children of the King. And he's, like I said, we struggle at times because of the world that we're in and because we've got an enemy that tries to head off the blessings. But don't give up on God, because God's got your best interest at heart. And God will get it to you through faith and through love and through his grace.